It's Geek Radio 1490, the Hour of Geek, as live we pay tribute to the late, great Jonathan Frid. It's going to be very difficult for me to say those two adjectives before his name, and I know it's how can I say this? The man lived a very long, full life, yes, but still, it's just hard to imagine that he's gone. And I know that a lot of folks greatly share that sentiment with me tonight as we remember him. One of the individuals for whom I will always remember those beautiful glass doll eyes and that wicked laugh and the fact that she came from the South didn't hurt either. Lara Parker, essentially, as she said in one of Catherine Lee Scott's compendiums, didn't make $1 million, but at least she honed her craft. And obviously, Jonathan Frid must have been a magnificent teacher and a great encourager in your craft of acting. Am I right in saying that, Miss Parker?
Well, hello, yes.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Lara Parker joins us tonight on the Hour of Geek as we pay tribute to Jonathan Frid. And I know, ma'am, that you and Catherine Lee Scott were very busy today at the Hollywood Collector Show in Los Angeles, and obviously she has her book Return to Collinwood, and you have your magnificent line of fiction novels from Tor Books based on Angelique, Angelique's Descent and the Salem Branch, and a new one involving Quentin. But obviously it was I guess you could say it was just really, I guess it might have been just really odd today. I mean, on the one hand, you're there to promote your line, but at the same time, people were just coming up to you as if they were members of the family.
That's right. A lot of people came by and offered condolences and sympathy and, like you, absolute shock, because I think everyone thought he would be around forever. I mean, he was a vampire after all. And I think people, the instant they're gone, suddenly the outpouring of appreciation and recognition, that's what comes next. And so there were a lot of people that came over and, looked at the books and the photographs and talked to us about our experiences on Dark Shadows all those many years ago when we were all working there as very young and inexperienced actors. And so it's a very sad thing. He was a remarkable person. He was completely genuine, warm, lovely sense of humor, well-trained classical actor, worked a lot in the theater, went to Yale Drama School, Royal Academy of Dramatic Arts, did a lot of Shakespeare. And the last thing in the world he ever expected to be was some kind of pop horror figure. I mean, he was always just a little chagrined and ashamed that that's what fell into his lap. That's the star that rose above his head, but he made the most of it. And he did a marvelous job, and he was well loved by so many fans. And he actually did save the show. It was we were 200 episodes into it, and it was going down the drain when he was introduced as a character. And he was meant to be a very short-lived character, just, a vampire. He kind of appeared and then got staked. But there was just a swarm of affection and interest and fascination with mostly his portrayal, because he, instead of choosing to be, a Bela Lugosi, gruff, mean, vicious, blood-sucking monster, he sort of played it as he would play his situation as an actor. Oh my God, what's happened to me? How did I end up in this character in this place doing these lines? And he always looked a little concerned and bewildered. And as he said, he would look around for looking like he was searching for the secrets of life, and he was actually searching for the teleprompter because he was not very good at remembering lines. And we only had one day to do the show, 4 rehearsals and camera blocking, and if we were lucky, a dress rehearsal. So often we were just praying that we would get through it, and he was too. I mean, we had a very short rehearsal period, and of course, no editing, no cutting, no stopping and starting over, never. So all the mistakes we made and the flubs in dialogue and calling person by the wrong name, that all went on the air. So.
And heaven forbid if Henry Kaplan was directing that day. Oh boy.
You know Henry?
Well, obviously, he's very notorious for his own particular brand of the grading and then transition and certain things pertaining to. So,
That's right.
yes, yeah. But I know that when you got the call for audition, Jonathan was very much of a tremendous help. In fact, reading on your tribute to him on your blog at laraparker.com, which I invite everybody to read after the broadcast. Essentially, I know he wanted for you to have the part, and typically most actors just basically, oh, okay, new girl here, all right, let's just read the lines, but that's it. But he took a very developed interest in obviously wanting for you to be a part of the cast, and obviously doing what was necessary in order to make sure that you were on board this magnificent repertory company of television.
Well, yes, I came into audition, and the scene was it was for a maid servant, and he had seduced me, but he had since then become engaged to my mistress, who was, of course, of wealth and high class. And I came to his room. The audition scene was clinging to him tearfully, begging him not to abandon me and to still love me and to still make love to me. We got ready to do the scene, and he whispered in my ear, "You know she's a witch." Of course, I had no idea. And if he hadn't told me that, I would have, I'd have played the scene tearfully and emotionally. But when he told me that, I went, "Oh, a witch? Well, I don't think you seduce and abandon a witch and get away with it." So I turned to the camera, and I gave the lens that hell hath no fury as a woman scorned look, and I got the part. And so he essentially changed my life because it was my first professional role, and I was just arrived in New York and hoping and praying that something good would happen, and something did. So he was a wonderful mentor. He was very kind, compassionate, very warm, very high standards, and brought this magnificent charisma to the role. He was always interesting and always powerful and always mysterious and very different kind of, not your usual Hollywood heartthrob. But the women across the country adored him. The whole idea of the vampire's bite, it was very new back then. No one had done that kind of thing where they had a real human being who felt very bad about what he was doing, but nevertheless he was doing it. Saying, "Come to me for comfort," and then a girl would come, mesmerized into his arms, and he would throw her head back and lean over and chomp her in the neck. Well, no one said anything about it, but it was very sexual. And so, housewives all over the country were sending him photographs of their necks, and then lower, and then lower, and then lower, because they wanted to be bitten. They wanted to have that agonizingly sensual moment with him. He was. It was the very beginning of the kind of vampire craze that we see today, which seems to be everywhere.
So, as I mentioned earlier in the broadcast, and what you had also mentioned as well, obviously before Barnabas, there was Nosferatu, there was Dracula, inhuman monsters, and Jonathan's attitude was, from his classical training, from his Shakespearean training, was to essentially put humanity into the character of the vampire in this case, to where if it weren't for Jonathan's portrayal in that manner, we would not have Lestat from Anne Rice. We wouldn't have Angel and Spike from Joss Whedon through Buffy. We wouldn't have in a sense, from Stephanie Meyer, Edward Cullen, we wouldn't have the characters in True Blood.
Well, I don't know if we would have had them or not, but he certainly was the inspiration, and he was the instigation of a vampire who, what he said when he went into the first conference with Dan Curtis, who was our producer, originator, and inventor of Dark Shadows, he said, I want to make him real, I want to make him human, and I want to give him a soul and a heart. And I think in that way, people will identify with him, because everyone out there has a problem that they have to cope with, and they're in a predicament that they wish they could change, and they've done things they regret. And so it made him very sympathetic. Made him, women's hearts, they wanted to help him out. But it was, you're right, it was also his classical training. It was his awareness that every great character has a deep human side, every great villain, I should say.
Lara Parker joining us on this broadcast of the Hour of Geek on Geek Radio 1490, where we are live till 1 a.m., paying tribute to Jonathan Frid, who passed away this past Friday, the 13th of all dates, just 5 days short of his first appearance as Barnabas, at least on taping, 45 years ago, back in 1967. And I know, Lara, that you and Catherine Lee Scott and David Selby and Jonathan were invited by Tim Burton's production team to go all the way across the pond to more or less essentially do a cameo. And I know that when the audiences will see this, they're going to stand up and cheer. Yeah. But obviously, I know where Jonathan was there for you back at that time. I know you and Catherine and David essentially had to be there for Jonathan. And God bless him. I mean, the man must have felt like at one point he feels like, well, I'm back in the swing of things. But on the other hand, he wants to go home back to Hamilton.
Yes, he was quite confused. He would go in and out of lucidity, and then he would retreat to dementia, and he was 89 years old, 88 and a half years old, and for several years he'd been sort of mentally failing, but we sort of ignored it. Sometimes he'd get irritable, and he'd get up at the table and walk away and go back to his room, but we didn't realize how bad it was until we got to England, and he was quite disoriented, and he was angry that he'd been talked into coming. He didn't know where he was, and I'm not sure he even knew who Johnny Depp was. It wasn't. He didn't talk about it as though, I'm going to get to meet Johnny Depp. But then when he was introduced on the set, he rose to the occasion, and he kind of maintained, and he smiled and made small talk, and he looked at Johnny's hair, and he says, I see you did the points, the curls on the forehead, and Johnny Depp said, yes, we did a few more. We're doing things a little differently this time. And, Jonathan said, well, I guess that I'm passing on the torch to the next vampire, the next Barnabas, and they were very sweet together, and Johnny Depp said to him, as he gestured to this magnificent set at Pinewood Studios that had been constructed for the movie. I mean, a huge entrance hall with a giant marble stairway and a chandelier the size of someone's bedroom, and carved statues of mermaids and paintings on all the walls of all the Collins ancestors. It was so magnificent. It completely took my breath away. It's huge. And so Johnny Depp, gestured. He said to all of this, he said, none of this would be here if it weren't for you, which was his way of paying homage to his predecessor. And I think a very genuine and affectionate way of doing it.
Looking at photographs from Catherine Lee Scott's books in past, obviously the rehearsal room where there was a photograph of Bela Lugosi as Dracula. I can only imagine it seemed probably right and fitting, and maybe this was the case. I maybe not so much of a photograph of Jonathan as Barnabas, but I know that they were running the DVDs in the makeup rooms. So
well, they said they were.
Yeah.
So that's what Helena Bonham Carter told us. She said, we're watching your show every morning in makeup, and we're all hooked. We don't know what we're going to do when we're finished through them all. So, but then she was interviewed later, and she said it was a perfectly awful afternoon soap opera. But I think she was referring to, our special effects, which were primitive to say the least. We had a bat. Well, when the Barnabas, when the vampire enters a room, he enters it as a bat. So our bat was one of those rubber Halloween toys on a string, attached to a fishing pole, held by a very anxious prop man who was dangling it in front of someone's face and trying to also stay out of the shot. I mean, it was all live. We never edited. We never went back and did it again. So, I mean, I guess, from the standpoint of incredible, the money and the resources of Tim Burton, it did seem pretty awful. But if she wouldn't have been there if it weren't for us.
and look at it this way, she wouldn't have been there if it weren't for Tim Burton either. So,
right,
being Mrs. Tim Burton.
Funny. Yeah. She told us that when he told her they finally had gotten a script and they were going to do Dark Shadows, and he wanted her to be in it. She said that they were on some kind of red carpet, some kind of promotion of something, and she said, "Oh, really?" And she said, "Oh, well, I'll have the part of Angelique. Thank you very much." And he said, "No, you don't get to do Angelique." But at least she has, she knew something about the show, and she's adorable. I mean, she's got this orange flip wig and these precious dresses with full skirts. She looks like she's nothing like our Julia Hoffman. She's girlish and I think drunk all the time.
I can safely say that Grayson Hall, if she were alive today, she would ask the same question we see Julia asking this in the trailers. Who the hell is that?
The hell is that?
Yeah,
I know.
Yeah.
Like she's doing in the trailer, right?
Yeah. But with respects to Eva Grant, and even though I've appreciated her previous works and everything from The Dreamers to Camelot, there is no sexier witch on television than your portrayal of Angelique. And
oh, really?
Well,
thank you very much.
Yes, ma'am. It's my honor. It's my honor. And I know that you're continuing on, at least where Angelique's Descent and the Salem branch are concerned. Tor Publishing is now re-releasing these titles, and I've seen them now in the bookstores, and they're all great reads, and there are a lot of young kids now who are starting to pick up on these things, and along the lines of, well, if you appreciate reading these. The teen horror and such, read the Dark Shadows books, and now they're starting to pick up those things as well. Yeah.
Well, I'm so glad they've been re-released. Angelique's Descent was out of print, but then when the movie came along, and Angelique turns out to be the antagonist, the big villain in the movie, Tor thought, well, of course, people will want to read, and it's the story of her childhood and how she in Martinique, and how she became a witch. She learned the voodoo arts, and it's the whole romance that was never dramatized on the show of Barnabas seducing Angelique and really falling very much in love with her, and then abandoning her for purposes of family connections in the beginning. So I tell that whole story, which was alluded to, but it was never told, and that's what Angelique's Descent is about. And then how she slowly sinks into witchcraft that is more and more insidious and harmful, and that's her descent. And so it was the first book. It was my first novel, and it was kind of an outpouring of passionate amateur writing, but the fans seemed to really love it. So, and then when I did the second book. The Salem branch, I also played a character named Miranda in 1692 during the Salem witch trials. And I think I just played her for one day, but I was intrigued by the idea that, the Salem witch trials were terribly wrong, and I think they hung 16 or 18 women, and they were all innocent. I mean, there were no witches. But I thought, wouldn't it be intriguing if there was a real witch? And that was my character. She was a real witch. Not a bad witch. I mean, one of those natural witches that does no harm but can cure people and make things better. And so I created this character and built the Salem branch around her and made her a very early member of the community. And when she's tried as a witch and her land is taken away and she's hung, the judge, of course, is a Collins, and she curses the Collins family from the scaffold. And so my whole idea in the Salem branch, which is, I think, a really good book, is that she began the curse that the Collins family lived under for centuries after that. And then the third book is called Wolf Moon Rising, and it's about Quentin and the portrait that keeps him young, and the portrait is lost, and he's desperate to find it because it also keeps him from falling into the werewolf curse, and so without the portrait, when the full moon comes, he'll become a werewolf. So it's sort of the search for Quentin's portrait, and it's also the romance between David, who is now 16, and Jacqueline, who is, of course, another reincarnation of Angelique, but she's only 16. So it's a kind of young romance. I'm trying to sneak into the Twilight idea of, two teenagers in love who can't really get together because one of them is enchanted. So Jackie is a witch, and David is the David that everyone knows and remembers from Dark Shadows, grown up into a fine young man who rides around on a snowmobile. Anyhow, that book should be out in the summer, early fall. It's at the editors now. So.
Well, at least we have Angelique's Descent as well as the Salem branch to catch up on.
Thank you so much for mentioning those. Yes.
Yes, ma'am. And your website, www.laraparker.com. Obviously, if you want to find out about your appearances coming up over the next few months, especially as now we're ramping up to the film and tremendous interest in the books as well. So, and that being said, I know I mentioned 15 minutes, and it's way more than that. But
it is.
Yes, ma'am. But I do appreciate your time, ma'am, especially as we remember.
This has really been fun. Thank you so much for calling me, Joy.
Yes, ma'am. It's my honor, and once again, thank you so much for being part of the legend, and thank you so much for joining us tonight as we remember Jonathan
Frid. I hope
Frid.
Everyone really, really loves the movie.
Indeed, we will, and it's definitely going to be worth the while. Thank you so much again, ma'am.
You're welcome.
My honor. Bye-bye now. Lara Parker, everybody. LaraParker.com, by the way. And yes, the book's Angelique's Descent and the Salem branch, and I believe Wolf Moon Rising surrounding Quentin. That's all due to be out by the end of by the fall of that last book. So just a heads up to let you know. Stay tuned. Coming up after the break, I'm going to go ahead and ring up Catherine Lee Scott. Catherine Lee Scott coming up after the top of the hour, and Jim Pearson, organizer of the Dark Shadows Festival's creative consultant for the Dark Shadows movie with Johnny Depp, directed by Tim Burton, and that is coming out in theaters May 11th, and also very much responsible for the MPI releases on video and DVD, so and a lot of insight as to how he did a lot of work with Jonathan as well, especially as he was over in England taking care of things with Jonathan as well for the cameo appearance in the Dark Shadows movie. So, we will continue after the break. It is the Hour of Geek on Geek Radio 1490 as we pay tribute to the late Jonathan Frid, who passed away last Friday, the 13th, at the age of 87. The original Barnabas Collins. Back after the break, stay with us.